Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to That Christian Nerd channel and Nerd Vision live streams. Hopefully, we're not screaming in this live stream. So, a few things to announce before I begin with the topic of this particular stream. So, a couple days ago, I believe I streamed with Professor Robert Ash on Black theology. We provide a introduction to Black theology, talked about what it is, respond to objections, and various things like that. So, I would encourage people to go check that out. It was a really, really good live stream. There are sources in the description of that video if you would like more information as well. Second thing to note is that this is the second stream that I am doing from my own laptop that I was able to get. And so, based on the lighting situation, again, note that the lighting may adjust throughout the stream. That is totally okay as long as you can still see me and hear me well. That should be fine. For some upcoming content, I am working on my next video in the Biblical Slavery series, just going through the Old Testament laws on slavery. I am starting to write that script. I'm also working on some gaming content that I would like to plan out for the entirety of next week. That's going to include Baldur's Gate 3. That's going to include some other stuff. And speaking of Baldur's Gate 3, that will also include some talk about D&D and stuff like that, because I've been DMing for a little while and it's been really fascinating and I have a lot to talk about there. So that said, I think that is about everything I wanted to cover. So let's go ahead and bring on my guest. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where people can find you, and what got you interested, particularly in the topic of intelligent design.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I want to thank Isaiah for bringing me on here. He's been very kind and making me comfortable, make sure I feel safe and everything. So I want to thank him for that. As for me, my name's Christian Dubose. I started apologetics when I was about 13 years old, and it started in science. I call it shallow apologetics, like Answers in Genesis, things that I don't necessarily agree with anymore. But that's where I started, and I grew towards more advanced apologetics, and I got my first real apologetic book called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Michael Licona and Gary Habermas. That was my first one. My mom bought it for me. And I didn't, the science kind of went away after that. I started focusing on history, but then 17 years old, I started talking to an atheist through email that my grandmother knew. And we started talking. I got back into science and learned about specified complexity. And I didn't really know what it was, and I took it my own way and ran with it, which was a really bad idea, but I did it anyway. And but nonetheless, that's what got me back into science. And I did philosophy last because I just don't like philosophy because I don't understand it. But nonetheless,
Fair.
I got into specified complexity more about 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, and I read Ewert's and Dembski's The Design Inference, second edition, or as much as I could. It was very hard to read statistics and all that. But nonetheless, I read that, and then I read Signature in the Cell, which got me even like more clarification and more knowledge, and read several articles online, read some of their peer-reviewed articles, and I just adopted the belief because I thought that it was valid.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, it sounds like you did a lot of research, and especially reading a very technical book. It can be hard. It can be
Yes, that was a very hard book.
very hard, for sure. So let's get into this. So what drew you into intelligent design is your desire to understand science, especially as it relates to these maybe debates between Christians and atheists.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, how would you summarize intelligent design for someone who has never heard of it?
The very broad, vague way of explaining it would be that it's that the scientific evidence that intelligence had a input in the making or creating of life. To be more specific, we would say that specified complexity and using inference to the best explanation and causes now in effect, we can conclude that life had some kind of mind behind it or intelligence. I would add here that we don't see very much in terms of like the universe or Earth, though I've heard it a little bit in intelligent design circles, but generally it's talking about life specifically.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Do you see, so you would see intelligent design as a scientific theory, and is that how, well, do you see it that way, and is that how it's been proposed?
I would say it's scientific and philosophical. It's scientific in the sense that it's mathematical. It uses scientific reasoning, the same one that Darwin and Charles Lyell used. Charles Lyell was kind of like a mentor for Darwin, and he used his thought of causes now and effect. And it's philosophical because it has philosophical assumptions and implications, just like Darwinism. So, like, who was it? Richard Dawkins said that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Well, that's a philosophical implication. I would say intelligent design also has philosophical implications, but it's still scientific and philosophical in that way.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, what are the core claims of intelligent design theory?
So I would say the first one is that life came about through an intelligence. We'll get into this later, but that doesn't necessarily point to which one, just that an intelligence, and that using scientific reasoning, including the one used by Darwin, Charles Lyell, intelligence is a good alternative to purely naturalistic or atheistic Darwinism.
Gotcha. So, how does it differ from classical creationism or young earth creationism? By classical creationism, I'm referring to like basic Christian
Mhm.
creationist views that have kind of been the tradition throughout church history, where, like, yeah, God is the creator of all things, specifically the Christian God. And maybe some of the implications that have fallen from that. So, how does intelligent design differ from that? And then specifically things like young earth creationism, where we see they are making biblical arguments and so on for why the earth is young and things like that.
Yeah, so I have a quote from William Dembski in his Design Inference, the second edition. I'm going to quote him to help me out with this one.
Mhm.
He says, "But a design inference cannot by itself tell us which intelligence was involved or how it was involved. To answer such questions requires further inquiry and additional evidence. Design inferences should therefore be viewed not as the end, but as the start of inquiry. Once a design inference is drawn, we need to dig deeper into the designer's identity, activity, and motives. This is also why I would say it doesn't stifle scientific growth, just like the inventors were of science itself, modern science, were creationists, and they didn't stifle it. So it's different in that it doesn't tell you how or necessarily what are the qualities of what created. It just tells you that an intelligence or a mind was behind it. I would say it differs from young Earth creationism, and it doesn't say anything about the age of the Earth. It's just like that it was created by a mind. It doesn't really get into specifics. But neither of these are necessarily against intelligent design. So, for example, Stephen Meyer, someone I greatly look up to, he's a great scientist, and he's said, or he's portrays in his book that he's an old Earth creationist. He thinks God created in intervals, basically. Then there's someone like me who leans young Earth. I'm not fully confident in that, but I lean that way. I need to research it more. And then there's people like Michael Behe, who's an old Earth evolutionist. I guess old Earth and evolution kind of go together, but he believes in theistic evolution. So these are compatible, but not required by intelligent design.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, very interesting. So, it's a theory that's sort of running through these different creationist views.
Mhm.
Gotcha. So, one of the arguments that I've heard was something I believe you have already brought up is this idea of irreducible complexity.
Mhm.
So, what is meant by that, and why is it important to the intelligent design argument?
Yeah, let me introduce this with a quote from Darwin himself in his Origin of Species. I think it's chapter 6 or 12. It's when he talks about evidence against his theory. He says, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. He goes on to say he doesn't know of anything like that. But intelligent design theorists, especially those who hold to irreducible complexity, would say that that's before they got more technology. Now we have more technology, we can see things that are irreducibly complex. So basically, it means that there are organs that cannot be reduced and therefore could not have built up because they would be lacking something. Another way to go about this, Michael B. he kind of talks about it in his book, his groundbreaking book, really, of Darwin's Black Box. He says, for example, with the immune system, He says, how's it go? There's about antibodies and B cells and T cells and all this other stuff. But he says the minimum required is 3 things, even though there's more than 3 things. And since there's a minimum of 3, evolution can't do it because it goes slightly by slight changes. And so he says that was too big of a change. I kind of call this marginally irreducibly complex because, kind of like with blood clotting, there's like over a dozen proteins involved. But like dolphins, they miss Hagemann factor. But I would still say it's marginally irreducibly complex because they can miss one but need all the others. And so that's kind of what that means. And this is important because it shows an intelligent design, either programmed or created altogether, an organism or organ in an animal.
Gotcha. So there is a sort of irreducible complexity to life. There is a sense in which you can only go so far before you reach what is minimally required for something, and this would be against evolution.
Not necessarily against evolution. It would be against the idea that it came about naturally by slight modification.
Gotcha.
So it can be said that it was created wholesale, or as some have said in intelligent design, that it was pre-programmed in the organism to make that jump. Because naturally it can't really do that, but if something pre-programmed it to do that, it can.
Gotcha. Okay. So you may have also already mentioned specified complexity. Can you explain the idea of specified complexity and how it is used to infer design?
Sure. So first, let me give a little history of it. So it has been used by scientists, including atheists, actually, for many decades in the field. For example, Leslie Orgel, I think that's how you pronounce your last name, said that, quote, living organisms are distinguished by their specified complexity. That's in Origins of Life, page 189, quoted by the Design Inference, page 159 or 259. Even Paul Davies and Richard Dawkins have used it in principle. The only thing is that it was a pre-theoretical concept. It wasn't fully developed. So what William Dembski did in 1990s is he fully developed it. And he successfully did so in the Design Inference first edition, which was initially accepted and peer-reviewed and published by Cambridge. It was accepted in science like archaeology and forensics as well. In his subsequent book, No Free Lunch, is where he got into trouble because he took that, what was initially applied to archaeology, forensics, and things like that, even the search for extraterrestrial life, and he took that and he applied it to biology. And that's when he got into trouble. So to get specifically into specified complexity, for specification, I will quote William Dembski and Winston Ewart. They say, to be specified is to have the property of being simply described, which, when given mathematical precision, comes down to having a short description according to a complexity measure that calculates description length. Now, that's a lot of technical language, but don't let that scare anybody. Basically, it means a pattern that is shortly described is specified. Now, a pattern is something that linguistically describes something. So if I'm going to describe a picture of an elephant, I would say elephant or something like that. Now, I'll get into a few examples in a second. This being said, not any pattern will do. Because they give an example of an archer. An archer shoots at a wall and then a bullseye is painted or spray painted or whatever around the bullseye. That doesn't really prove anything. However, if their bullseye is already there and then he shoots an arrow and he makes it 100 times, that shows skill. And so they call that independently given pattern. That means that the pattern was done without knowledge of the previous event. Now, there's also something called conditional independence, meaning that background knowledge does not affect the probability and therefore can still be considered specified. Another way something can be specified is if it has a function. That's mentioned by Stephen Meyer and kind of touched on in the Design Inference second edition. Complexity refers to improbability. So there are different positions on this. William Dembski says the probability for something to be known to be designed is 1 in 10 to the power of 150, which is 10 with 150 zeros behind it, which is a very large number. He got this by multiplying the amount of elementary particles in the universe, like quarks and gluons, and seconds since the universe began, and how many times they react per second. And you get to 140, 1 to 10 to 104, or 10 to the 140th power.
Okay.
The reason he did this is because anytime something happens, then that means a elementary particle has reacted. And therefore, the amount of chances something has to happen at most can be 10 to the power of 140, but then he rounds up for the sake of the argument. However, some people like me just say the improbability has to be beyond the probabilistic resources for it to count. Probabilistic resource just meaning the amount of opportunity something had to happen. And both of these are actually mathematical concepts. Now let me get into some examples. Maybe this will clear up some confusion because it certainly confused me. Let's say I flip a fair coin 100 times, and the sequence of heads and tails is equally improbable no matter what the sequence is. Now, if I give you a description, heads, tails, tail, head, 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 tail, tail, head, head, tail, you'd be like, okay, whatever. If I say all heads, you'd be like, that's weird. No, I don't believe that because that's 100 times. And they're both equally improbable, which was interesting to me. But the difference is specification. One is all heads, one is head, tail, tail. You have to describe it longer.
Gotcha.
Another example would be weathered rock. Say if I want to describe a cliff, I'd have to say, well, a line here, a bump here, a crack there, and all this other stuff. But however, Mount Rushmore, I say 4 faces of U.S. presidents. That's a short description length, at least compared to these really long ones. And the improbability of Mount Rushmore coming about naturally would point to the fact that it's designed. Now, one more example to do the function, or to show how functionality shows design. Let's look at a game of roulette in a casino. Let's say some guy picks a different slot per every game, and he wins every single time. And he does this 100 times. It's like, okay, well, the chances of that are beyond improbable, but there's not necessarily a short pattern because he's picked a different slot every time. However, there is a function, he wins every time, which now makes it specified because there is functionality.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And so the intelligent design argument wants to look at this specified complexity that is in life. As you mentioned, intelligent design is specifically referring to life. It is specifically used for life and stuff like that. And wants to infer from these very specific facts, patterns, functions that there must have been a designer.
Yes, and they use experience for that. I guess I should have mentioned that they're using what Charles Lyell, the one that Darwin used. What was it? Causes, now, and effect. And so we see that now. We look at a game board, we look at a picture, we look at anything. We say that has specified complexity. Then we take that same knowledge and we apply it to DNA or to an organism, and we say, wow, that's specified complex too. Well, if this is designed, then that can be designed too. And that's kind of the logic of it.
Gotcha. Okay. So what are the strongest empirical evidences in your view for intelligent design? What sort of, and maybe what big arguments or big facts convinced you?
Yeah, the first one would probably be one of the earliest studies, which was done by Douglas Axe, I think at Cambridge. He did research about proteins folding. So for those who don't know, proteins have 4 levels of structure. There's the amino acid, the polypeptide chain, and then their fold, which gives it the function. And the 4th one is only if there's multiple proteins. Well, the fold is very specific for a specific function. He found that the chances of a protein folding into a specific function was 1 in 10 to the power of 77. And he calculates how many organisms have ever existed, which is 10 to the power of 40. Well, that's obviously the probability of them getting a proper protein fold is way beyond. And so even getting 1, and we need not just we, but any organism needs a lot of proteins. Another one would be a peer-reviewed journal article by Stephen Meyer about the Cambrian explosion, which is a period of life where animals kind of appear with no evolutionary ancestors. And he published it's called The Origin of Biological Information and the Higher Taxonomical Categories. It explains also why other naturalistic theories don't work and how they got there. And if you want this to be explained more, there's Darwin's Doubt, the book he wrote. You can also go look at and I'll get this in a second, you can go look at that peer-reviewed article for free. But also he wrote a book, Darwin's Doubt, that explains it better and talks about intelligent design and stuff. There's also the research as collected in The Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. That was very convincing to me. It's probably the best book, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I think, at the very end. But he goes through empirical evidence of DNA, what it does, what it's made of, what it looks like, and things like that. And then he does origin of life research, and we'll get into this, that you can't really empirically tell the past. You can't empirically observe the past. And so you use what's now in effect, and you go back then. Well, he looks at what it is now, goes back into the primitive history of Earth, and says, well, then this had to be designed. And I think this would be a good place to add. Discovery Institute, which we'll get into, has a website with over 150 peer-reviewed articles for intelligent design. And you can go look at a lot of them for free. Some of the links don't really work. I've tried them, but you can look at a lot of them for free. And you'll get a lot of this research. And lastly, I wanted to point to Biocomplexity. It's a relatively new journal. I think it's ran by intelligent design theorists. I'm not fully sure, but it's a peer-reviewed journal of intelligent design testing it to see if it works. And in that, you'll get actual research like the way proteins fold, or DNA, or irreducible complexity, and things like that. They do actual research there.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, I would, I mentioned this to you, but feel free to send me a lot of those resources. I can put them in the description of this video for you guys to check out. That'd be great, so that you guys can do your own research on these subjects. So there's a lot of criticism and a lot of debate about intelligent design. A lot of critics will claim that it is not testable and it is not falsifiable. So they will claim that, unlike a lot of scientific theories, there's no way to test this.
Mhm.
And secondly, because there's no way to test this, you can't demonstrate that it is false,
Mhm.
which is a problem in science and even other fields of study, because you need to have a way to demonstrate that something at least could be false, even if it's not. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, for testifiable, that's true and it's false. As I said, intelligent design deals with the past and therefore falls into a category of science called historical science. This was talked about by Stephen Jay Gould, I think. He was an evolutionist. He came up with punctuated equilibrium, I think, him and someone else. But he talks about historical sciences like geology. You can't go back and test how a mountain was made, but you can see that mountains were, or how today tectonic plates go up and stuff like that. And you can infer from the present what happened in the past, which makes it somewhat empirical, which is why it's also false, because you can empirically see specified complexity in that design or intelligence makes those designs, and therefore you can go into the past and infer the same thing. So it is testable, but it's not in the same way a lot of science is. For falsification, I would say that's just false. No pun intended. If you could discover something that has specified complexity, and surely you saw it not be designed, then that would deal a huge blow to intelligent design movement. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be fatal. I have seen other ways people have gone about it. They're just not as famous or as well thought out as specified complexity, but that would deal a very huge blow, and that would make it falsifiable.
Gotcha. Okay. So many in the scientific community label intelligent design as pseudoscience. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say, based off the way we can somewhat do empirical evidence, we are using scientific reasoning as Darwin did. We would have to classify as scientific, even if we're wrong. Science can be wrong. And so I would say the same thing. And as for the reason why people say that, I would say it's the same reason Galileo's theory of the Earth and the sun and all that was resisted. I would say it goes against what we think to be the case and infiltrates our religious views. To start, we all have preconceived notions, scientists, laymen, everybody. And while most scientists do believe in a higher power, according to Pew Research, most actually believe that either there's no God, which is a minority, but if you add on deistic ideas, that would make it a majority. And whenever people even think we're going against that, that's going to cause resistance. Now, I don't want you to think this is just because it's religious. This is everybody. If you come to me and you say, hey, I think, what's it called? I don't remember. Let's say pecan pie is better than apple pie. I'm like, I don't know. Convince me of that, because I have a preconceived notion because I've had both and I don't like one. And it could be, depending on what the belief is, and I've known people even with regular beliefs that are just normal beliefs, that if you go against it, nothing you say will convince them, just because they already believe it and they don't want to admit they're wrong. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone that's saying science or intelligent design is pseudo-scientific, but I think that's the case for a lot of them. And I think the fact that intelligent design proponents, a lot of them are Christian, though it doesn't necessarily require Christianity, which we'll get into, but are Christian, mixed with the misconception that intelligent design is a Christian movement, makes people not want to because we don't want God to exist. So that part is religious, though it doesn't necessarily have to be. And then I would just say the misconceptions in general of intelligent design, like it's not testable, it's not falsifiable, there's no peer review evidence, which is just false because there is. That all those together would, to me, make sense on why people would resist. Like I would resist it if what they said was true, the misconceptions. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's fair. Misunderstandings can really make it difficult um, to. It's hard to get past misconceptions, I should say, to convince people. So, how does intelligent design handle the argument from poor design in nature? So I have, even as a theistic evolutionist who currently is not a intelligent design proponent, I have seen uh, atheists, evolutionists say that like if God designed this, like he's dumb or
Mm-hmm.
something like that because the of all the failures and imperfections, even just in the human body and in various different structures. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so there's really a few ways to go about this. For like vestigial organs, for example, one way I would go about it is arguing that there's not that many, which is probably gonna be one of the most controversial things I say on this podcast, or not podcast, but video. So, like for example, the appendix. We know that it probably we don't fully know, but we think, or scientists think, that it stores good bacteria. The tailbone of humans, we know it's a connection for ligaments and tendons and stuff. We also know it balances you when you sit. The whale hip bone, it used in reproduction. So you can call it an analogous structure, which is what I was taught in high school, where it is something similar to another organ in another animal, but it has a different function. But you can't call it vestigial because it's not useless. As for like bad design, as like when we swallow or breathe air, it goes through the same tube in our body. Well, there's a few things that is problematic with that. One, we'd argue once again, there's not that many. But two, Howard Glicksman and Steve Loftman in their book, Your Design Body, talks about how our bot and nature in general, our organism in general, work according to engineering principles. One of the engineering principles is that there's always trade-offs. And so we look at what's most efficient and effective. So for example, using the same tube, if we didn't, we would need two esophaguses, esophagi? I don't know. Two mouths, two sets of teeth, two noses. Well, that's just extra. That's inefficient. That's not good. And so God, or an intelligence, or may it be God or not, put it together as one, which is more efficient and effective. But now we have the low risk of choking. And I would actually emphasize that low risk. I've done the research. It's like 0.0002% people die in America of that alone. So it's actually very low. There's, I think William Dembski talks about the blind spot. I don't remember exactly what he says in our eyes, but there's a reason for that too. So there's trade-offs. Another one is that we don't know a lot about our bodies compared to what we don't know what we don't know. And so making a premature idea that something is badly designed, William Dembski, I think, is the one who explains that's just not a good idea. That's not really good science. Lastly, and probably the biggest problem, is subjectivity. What one person says is bad, and just look at the example I've already given. Let's look at the esophagus, using the same tube for air and water and food and stuff. One person says that's a terrible design. I say, actually, it's pretty good. Well, that's subjectivity. Who's right? We can't really prove who's right, who's wrong, so we can't make an objective argument from subject evidence.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that is understandable. So, is people will argue that intelligent design is a God of the gaps argument. If anyone doesn't know, the God of the gaps is proposed as a fallacy, a flaw in the way that people think, by which one just sort of sticks God in something they don't understand, and this happens in people's personal lives. I've seen people. I mean, even in the Christian ethos, I've seen people ascribe things to God and Satan that's just their body and their mind, whether that's, they're nervous or they're anxious about something, or, they're angry or whatever it may be. And but this also happens in philosophical arguments, and so the argument goes that intelligent design is just sticking God is somewhere that he either doesn't belong, or or in a place that we have limited knowledge, and thus we might not need God if we find out what we don't know. And so, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I would say it's not based on ignorance, but experience. So, as I've said before, it's looking at, we can tell that specified complexity is made by minds. We can tell that information is made by minds. I don't think many people would deny that writing or any kind of information doesn't come from minds. That would be kind of weird. The argument comes, is DNA information, which also is actually pretty widely accepted that it is. And then the question becomes, can that be used in the past? And using causes now in effect or now in operation, we can say that's at least a possibility, if not like certain. And some people would say that, well, we don't know anything in nature that can make specified complexity yet. And I would say, okay, so I want to go to Princeton someday. So let's say that I send a letter out to Princeton or an email, and they send me a letter saying, hey, we accept you. Would I look at that and be like, yes? Or would I look at that and be like, I don't know, nature, we don't know yet. No, we're gonna be like, yes, I got accepted. And the same thing is true here. Why would we accept it if there's literally no evidence that nature can, and a lot of evidence and everyday experience that a mind can? And so, and there is an aspect in which it's ignorance. For example, what's his name? Stephen Meyer, his book Signature in the Cell, he goes through all the natural ways life could have developed and shows how they couldn't have. That is an aspect of, that's not the whole thing, but it's an aspect, and a valid aspect, according to inference, the best explanation. If you're and this is used in history all the time and historical sciences, you go through all the different ways another theory is wrong to show that yours is right. So it's a valid way of doing it, but it's only an aspect. And I would also argue that there is something, at least kind of in the sense of a naturalism of the gaps, in the sense that you're saying, we don't know how it could happen yet, so it was nature. It's like, well, not necessarily. That's naturalism of the gaps instead of God of the gaps. We're using what we know, and I think that's fair.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a fair point there. So, intelligent design has a educational and even legal history.
Mm-hmm.
It's, from my understanding, people wanted intelligent design to be taught in public schools, and some people have proposed that intelligent design was created in a attempt to get creationist, young earth creationist views taught in schools. Not saying that is or is not the case, but do you think intelligent design should be taught in public school science classes? Why or why not?
Since it uses the scientific method, has over 100 peer-reviewed articles supporting it, and doesn't promote any specific religion, I do think it at least can and probably should be taught as an alternative to purely naturalistic and atheistic Darwinism. I think it's at least it would make people more open-minded, which I want to add that intelligent design is more open-minded because it can be evolution or it can be creation. It can be young earth creation, it can be old earth creation. It's a lot more open-minded, and it can create a more well-rounded society if it's taught.
Gotcha. So, what are your thoughts on the Dover trial and its impacts on this movement? Go ahead and explain the trial for those who don't know, and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I can't remember where it was. I think it was, I can't remember where exactly it was. I know it was in America, but like what state. But it was basically a trial saying, should intelligent design be taught in schools? They had witnesses come up, like scientists say, well, no, because it's not scientific according to definition, it's not testable and whatever. Then they had some intelligent design proponents come up, and they argued about it. And then they ultimately decided, no, it's creationism, and that shouldn't be taught. I didn't know much about it. I still don't know a whole lot about it because I don't really dabble in the politics and bureaucracy of it. I care more about the scientific evidence of it. And then I read Signature of the Cell, and I got a little bit more about it. But once again, I still don't really look into it because I don't really care. There seem to be many problems with the opposition, though, in terms of their opposition to intelligent design. So, for example, they said it is by definition not scientific. Well, philosophers of science will tell you there is no definition of science because it is so broad. Geology, medicine, paleontology, everything that you can't actually define it. Therefore, that doesn't make sense. It is testable in the sense that geology is testable. So saying it's untestable is wrong. It's not falsifiable. I would say that was wrong. They even came up and said there's 0 peer-reviewed articles supporting intelligent design, which is verifiably wrong. You can literally go to a website where they name them for free. So I don't know if they had that at the time, but they do now. But yeah, so I would say that shouldn't be a defining factor.
Gotcha. How can, and this, is more of a societal, political, legal question as well, but how do you think intelligent design could be presented in educational settings without violating the church-state separation, at least for those who care about the church-state separation, not to get political?
Fair enough. Yeah, so I would say the main way is just saying an intelligence-guided evolution or created directly, not getting into any specific God and just getting into the evidence. And you don't even necessarily have to make an opinion on was it guided by evolution or did he create directly. There's many ways you could do it without getting in the way of separation of church and state. As of right now, I would argue that religion and state are getting together because you're teaching a merely naturalistic way of doing things, which is itself a religious idea because it points to atheism. And so to kind of balance things out, I would say, and for other reasons, intelligent design, which doesn't even necessarily postulate, and we'll get into this, an all-powerful God and an omniscient God, an all-loving God, all-perfect God, none of that's necessary. And we're just saying an intelligence made things or created things.
Gotcha. So now we have philosophical and important philosophical and theological dimensions to this. So you've touched on this, but is belief in a designer necessarily religious, theistic, tied to Christians? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would argue it could be theistic in a sense, which once again isn't necessarily a religion. It's more of a philosophy in my opinion, but even if it is a religion, because it goes into many religions, so it's not like a one all unique religion, if you know what I'm saying, if you get what I'm saying. It does posit that a mind created things, which is consistent with like Christianity, the Islam, Judaism, and even other religions. But it doesn't necessitate that. We would have to investigate more scientifically, more philosophically, and more historically to see which God it is, if it's even a God. Now, it can have religious implications, which obviously many things, any kind of origin of life research will have religious implications because it answers questions like where do we come from, where do we go? And that's religious in nature. And so, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, understandable. So how does intelligent design relate to classical theism or natural theology? For those who don't know, classical theism is going to be basically classical Christian theistic thought, which is going to say that God has specific attributes. So things like omniscience, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, and there is others as well in philosophy. Natural theology, referring to is a sort of a branch of Christian theology that deals with creation, that deals with nature, the natural world, those sorts of things. So how could intelligent design, maybe could is the better question, how could intelligent design relate to classical theism and natural theology?
Yeah, it at most postulates, points to a very powerful and intelligent mind behind everything, especially life, which would make sense in a theistic or classical theistic idea. And as for natural theology, of course, the letter of Romans says that God's existence is clear in nature. And taking intelligent design along with other scientific ideas and other philosophical ideas, I think it does point to God. not necessarily the Christian God, but a theistic God. Um, that being said, I don't think looking through the lens of science we can necessarily get to an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, all-loving, all-perfect, and all these things. We can get some aspects like God's love, and this is kind of a different discussion. But for example, we know it's touched on in Your Design Body by Steve Loffman and Howard Glicksman that we were created beyond the ability to survival, and we were created to enjoy things, which could suggest that whatever created us loves us, or at least cares for us, wants us to enjoy things. But that's not necessarily a part of intelligent design, and all it proves or shows or suggests would be that whatever did create us had a loving side to it, and actually cares for us. But yeah.
Gotcha. So, this has actually come up for me because I've seen so many intelligent design proponents argue against evolutionary theory. And as a theistic evolutionist, I'm concerned with that. So how might intelligent design be reconciled to theistic evolution? What is that history like, and how is that done?
Yeah, so of course there's debate in intelligent design on whether or not evolution's true. So like there's a book about that thick. I haven't read every part of it, by Stephen Meyer. I think J.P. Moreland's in there, and Gunther Beckley, who I think died recently, unfortunately. And they all say that theistic evolution is wrong for all these reasons. But then you have people like Michael Behe, who's like, well, there's theistic evolution. He could have pre-programmed it into there. And William Dembski has, in one of his debates, he's basically said the same thing, that it could be pre-programmed in there by a designer to do these things. So it's really not at all against evolution. It's just against naturalistic evolution or atheistic evolution. The sense that there is no God, it's all natural. That's what it's against. And so, personally, I hold to creation. But there are some intelligent design theorists like Michael Behe who hold to theistic evolution. And it chiefly states that there was an intelligent creator. It doesn't say how it was created, though you can debate it, and there's free debate, there's free thinking in it. And yeah.
Gotcha. Does Michael Behe have a book on this subject where he talks about like that reconciling and whatnot?
I don't know. I know of his Darwin's Black Box, and he's done many debates, or at least some debates. I don't know if he has any books about reconcile. He might. I'm not sure. I have to look into that.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. I was just curious. So, excuse me. How or it says well, you've already touched on this, but it seems that intelligent design does not require belief in a specific kind of designer. So vague terms like intellect, mind, or designer can be used, but it could be God, it could be a different terms that could be applied maybe from different religions and stuff like that. So would you, that sounds like at least that's what the theory is proposing.
Yeah, I think as William Dembski or Michael Behe in one of their debates, I forgot which one, they said that these things are not required, but they are compatible. These things can be brought into intelligent design because it's very open and broad, but yeah.
Gotcha. So I'm curious. What are the big developments, or are there any big, exciting current developments that are going on in the intelligent design community?
Yeah, I think I don't know how long they've been doing this, but they've started doing seminars and classes, at least relatively recently. I get because I'm subscribed to Discovery Institute, specifically like Evolution News and other things, where they talk about, hey, you can come and be involved in these seminars or classes. You have to pay for it, which is why I haven't done it yet, because I have no money. But nonetheless, there are opportunities like that where you can learn more. There's also Biocomplexity, the Lab Research Institute, where they do peer-reviewed journal articles testing intelligent design. That's been there since, I think, like 2009, maybe. So it's not necessarily like new, but it's relatively new. There's also, which one is it? Discovery Institute Press. They're releasing new books all the time. Another one by I think Howard Glicksman and Steve Loftman, who did Your Design Body, which I highly recommend, by the way. But there isn't another one. I think it's Your Amazing Body. But they have a press where they release a whole lot of stuff. And let's see, yeah, that's about all I can really think off the top of my head and from my notes.
Gotcha. So, how do you see the future of intelligent design in science and culture? It kind of sounds like, I mean, it's trying to be a scientific theory. It is scientific theory, so it has definitely touched that already. It's even touched culture with, that legal
Mhm.
discourse, right, and the sort of political issues going on with intelligent design. But what do you think could happen in the future with science and culture in relation to intelligent design?
Well, the movement's growing. It's not stagnant. It's not just a group of like five thinkers. It is actually growing. They have a list of people of all kinds of scientific backgrounds, have a list saying, do you at least have questions or doubts about Darwinism, pure naturalistic Darwinism? And that list is growing as well. And so it is a growing movement. I think as more people courageously, I would add, come forward in support of either it being a valid thing or even just agreeing with it, that would grow it more, and people come out and say, "Yeah, I have questions about traditional neo-Darwinism and things like that." Um, that would make it grow more, and yeah, that's how I'll say that.
Gotcha. What would it take? Because it sounds like intelligent design does not have broader scientific acceptance.
Mhm.
So what do you think it would take for intelligent design to gain that broader scientific acceptance?
Interestingly, I was trying to remember a quote the last several days. I can't remember exactly how it was, so I'll give you kind of what I remember. But basically, what's going to need is time. See, as old people, or not old people, old ideas that come in and then they leave through people who leave science, the scientific world, and new ideas come in and new people come in. As that happens, worse ideas are going to leave and better ideas are going to come. Even if it's just slightly better, it's going to start growing. So what it needs mostly right now is just time. And as long as in Discovery Institute and these intelligent design proponents keep going forward and doing things, keep on their research, keep answering questions, keep doing classes, it's just going to keep growing, and time will tell, and time will add to the movement.
Gotcha. What we've already touched on some misconceptions, but what do you think are some of the most common misconceptions about intelligent design, or like that one thing that's like it's always brought up when you start talking about intelligent design to people?
Yeah, I'll give two. So I guess I'm cheating a little bit, but I'll give two.
Go for it.
One, that it's unscientific, like by definition, or because there's no peer-reviewed articles. Actually, on my free time, I debate people on Facebook, as everyone does. And
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
one time I was debating someone. He said there is no peer-reviewed articles, and I said, "Well, here's a link where there's like 100," and then he never spoke to me again. And so that's just one example of how, let's see, that people think it's unscientific when it's not. And that would be one. The second one is that's Christian young Earth creationism in disguise. There's nothing about the age of the Earth in intelligent design. You can be a creationist, so I guess creation is in there, but you can also be a theistic evolutionist. So I don't think that really holds up either.
Gotcha. What do you wish more people understood about intelligent design? If there is and you can cheat again, but if there's one thing where it's like, please just get this, what would it be?
Really, just and this one I will do one, even though I have permission to cheat, I won't. Just scientific roots, and the fact that it uses Charles Lyell's own logic and Darwin's own logic, and then points to the past. It's a historical science. A lot of people don't realize that there is different types of sciences. So yes, there's empirical, but there's also historical. And if people would realize that, you can see that intelligent design looks at the historical aspect, and that would bring me a lot of relief because I wouldn't have to debate it so much, and it would also help.
Mhm. No, totally fair. So, if you had to recommend one book, article, or research on intelligent design, what would it be and why?
The Like primarily, I would recommend a Discovery Institute. Not only do they have over 100 peer-reviewed articles, which you can look at for free. A lot of them, like I said, the links don't necessarily work, or you have to pay for them or whatever, or get on into the institute, not their institute, but the institute that's published on. But they also have blogs and videos and scientists who go on there and say things. They answer common objections, non-common objections, and it's just, but I will cheat here also because it is such a very big and broad thing. It might be hard to follow. If you want something more professional and something more technical, something more in depth, I would recommend Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer, which is a book. So one or the other or both. So yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you guys, everyone, for joining me for this. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to put them in the chat. We would love to answer them. I have a couple of questions just to, like, bounce off of you a little bit as people are putting stuff in the chat if they want to put anything in the chat. So, one of the questions that I had as I was looking through the script and preparing for this was, like, a lot of the most prominent intelligent design proponents seem to be Christian.
Mhm.
Are there any prominent proponents we could look at that are Muslim or Jewish or Hindu, right? Any these other religions?
Major proponents, not that I know of. I think I have heard of some other religions, other religious people who have come on board. And I know in that list of people who are starting to doubt Darwinism or at least have questions on it, they that's has atheists on, it has different religions on too. But I don't know of any major proponents that aren't Christian.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I wonder. I have to look more into it, but I wonder, like, why that is because it's open to others, but it seems mostly Christians have come on board.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to say and I forgot to say is that it's not in disguise. They're very open about it. Stephen Meyer writes in his book, I have never, I'm a Christian. And as a Christian, you kind of have to be that way because Jesus tells you to do so. But it's not in disguise. And the second thing I wanted to add was that Christianity is the most widespread religion, especially in the West. And so it's going to make sense that most people who vote for some kind of intelligence are going to be Christian because we just make up most of the population compared to Muslims, Hindus, and whatever. And I would also add that Hindus don't seem to be, or not Hindus, Muslims and even Jews, they don't seem to be as involved in like apologetics or evidence for their worldview. And Christians are more outspoken because we have a mission. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Christian movement, though it does have Christians, but that's why Christians are going to get on board more than, say, a Muslim would, because we're more open about, hey, there's some kind of intelligence, and we're going to be open to saying that more than anyone else would be.
Gotcha. Yep, that's more understandable for sure. So so related to this, you mentioned that you considered yourself a creationist. So
Mhm.
how do you think of well, let me put it to you this way. Has young earth creationism impacted your view on intelligent design, or has intelligent design impacted your view on young earth creationism?
Young Earth creationism, I would say intelligent design hasn't really affected that at all. Um, uh, I don't think it really went either way. I knew about young Earth creationism before I was an intelligent design proponent. When I learned about intelligent design, it still says literally nothing about the age of the Earth, so it didn't really affect me at all. The only thing it kind of affected was, okay, so there is a scientific root to the idea that there's an intelligence, and that intelligence could be my God. And therefore, I was like, that makes sense. Let me see if it pans out. I kind of researched it, read Design of First, and was like, okay, so it does. So I don't know if they really influenced each other as much as they just kind of came together perfectly. I don't know. Yeah.
Gotcha. No, that is totally fair. So I don't think we have any questions, comments, or concerns, or anything like that with the chat. So I will go ahead and conclude this. Thank you so much for joining me for this. It was a joy to hear someone defend it and hear about some of the sources and information behind it. I and definitely something to research more in the future, because while I, at least currently, am not a proponent of it, if it is true, then that's great. because for several reasons, right? But because it's compatible with the faith, and I think could help atheists who are more inclined to science come on board, or at least be more open to religion generally, which would be awesome. So,
Yeah.
so thank you so much for joining me for this, guys. Make sure to check out my content in the coming weeks, as you'll see clips of this. You will see uh, gaming content coming out and all sorts of other things. Feel free to check out my last live stream, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, where we talked about, where I spoke to Professor Robert Ashe, introducing Black theology, Black Christian thought, in that sort of thing. But again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Is real quick before we go, is there anywhere people can find you to get more from you and your content?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. It's Seek and Find. It's kind of a dark picture with a cross. I don't have that many followers, and I'm not too active on there, but I'm trying to get more active on there. So that's where you can find me.
Gotcha. Yeah. Again, thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching, and have a blessed day.
You too.